Imagine having a tool that helps you prepare ahead of time for discussion at your own pace, on your own time, without feeling stressed out about saying the wrong thing. Well, the reality is, you don't have to imagine because this tool exists and you've probably already been using it. What we're going to spend the next few minutes doing is talking through some AI enhanced AAC augmentative and alternative communication technologies. And what these technologies are designed to do is to help provide opportunities for support and self expression and social participation in a way that really is designed to support you and help you communicate more effectively. These tools are incredible, but yes, there are some risks and challenges and things to consider as we're using them, and then maybe some handy prompts and different approaches you can take. So I'm really excited to be stepping into this journey with you today over the next fewer than 30 minutes. Now, before we get any further in this, though, I know that there is an important line here. If you prefer accommodation to your existing communication patterns, I certainly want to be respectful of that. If it's one of your goals, though, to improve your social communication through specific strategies and exercises and interventions and self awareness, AI can provide an amazing opportunity to do that for a variety of people and a variety of reasons. Okay, so with that said, we're going to focus in on how can we use some of this amazing technology at our disposal in a way that is supportive and helpful, but also doesn't hinder us as we continue to grow, whether it's professionally or at home. So let's think about context, right? We'll just take a minute back just a second. So you might have in your experience realized, I really prefer written or other forms of communication, like maybe it's a text message or an email. Maybe that makes you feel a little bit more comfortable, especially if it's unfamiliar or it's a high stakes setting, like a work presentation or maybe an intense meeting with your spouse or a sibling or another family member. And you would rather be able to sit down and write out your thoughts, or maybe you want to text it out. Maybe you're somebody who uses voice notes, right? I love to use those. But if you can think about it ahead of time and maybe even get some feedback on those thoughts, that's really valuable for you. So, one of the things that we know is that these digital tools that we've had for over 20 years now, like emails and text and chat, it can reduce that anxiety and that apprehension you feel by allowing more time for processing and, let's face it, a clearer organization of our thoughts. Because if you're anything like me, there have been moments where I have had so much to say and so much going through my mind that I just feel like I can't get those words out in a way that makes sense, where someone will understand what I'm thinking and feeling. So I end up doing these word vomits, this word dump, and say, okay, what is this? What am I trying to actually say here? When we use assistive communication tools, including generative AI, this gives us more autonomy and more control because we get to choose when and how to express those different ideas. So, I want us to just pause for just a moment and I want you to think about a recent situation where communication felt a little bit challenging. Maybe it didn't have the outcome that you hoped for. What do you wish you could change about that moment? If you're following along on our handout, you can jot those notes down there. You could also pause this video and do a voice recording to record what you're thinking if that feels more comfortable to you. Either way, hit pause and consider a recent situation where communication felt challenging. All right, I'm assuming that you have unpaused this recording, you've taken some notes, you have an idea. As you're reflecting over that situation, you might be wondering, man, what could I have done a little bit differently to process what I could have said, or maybe to help me better understand what this other person was thinking or saying? If I could only hit an actual pause button in real life. One of the things I love about generative AI is that it enables us to sort of simulate and practice these human conversations, whether we're using actual communication as our example or hypothetical. It gives you an opportunity to really process this in a low stakes way. It's all about that practice. So let's think through as we're thinking about ways we can use generative AI to practice. I want us to run through just a quick reminder about what Gen AI is. So it's really important to remember that this is a machine. It is not another human that is actually thinking or feeling here. One of the things that AI does well is it can give you human like responses, but it's all based on predictive modeling to simulate human response, which means it's great for practice, but it is never a substitution for real human interaction. And let me tell you, I am a real human. I am sitting in my desk in Kentucky talking to you right now. And I know there are many other people in your life that want to communicate with you. So before we go any further, I do want to remind you that it's the relationships with the people you have in real life around you that are most valuable. So while AI can help you practice and be part of your support system, it should never replace the relationships you have in the real world. Another thing to consider as we talk about practicing some of these skills. Practicing in a digital environment may initially feel safe, but some of those skills won't always transfer to in person or to spontaneous interactions with other people. Okay. So we want to really make sure that we're practicing in small doses online and then offline to see if those strategies really worked. So we don't want to just practice only with our tools. We want to take this offline as well. One of the things I love about these generative AI tools is that your individual needs and preferences for communication are totally unique. And so you can tailor whether it's the input method or the pacing of that work to your individual needs. So I encourage you to do so. I've got a couple of sample prompts at the back end of that handout, but I really encourage you to customize those according to your individual communication preferences. So if you don't want to use text based input, use voice based input instead, or vice versa. We also want to remember that one of the things that AI doesn't have is cultural context of any kind. It doesn't know the background of that relationship that you might be practicing or that communication situation that you might be practicing. So remember, we always want to take those responses with maybe more than a little bit of a grain of salt. Good for practice, but we always want to use our outside support systems as well. So, let's talk about some of the opportunities and the ways that you can use this technology. So, one of the ones I've mentioned right off the bat is that you can simulate some scenarios that might be relevant to your life. Just to think of a couple, right? Let's start in the category of work. So perhaps you have an upcoming job interview. You can use generative AI tools like ChatGPT or Gemini or Microsoft Copilot or several others to help you practice job interview questions. So, for example, you could ask it, what type of questions might I encounter in a job interview? And it will begin by giving you a list of those questions where then you can practice your responses, even in a role playing scenario. Perhaps if it's a client service or a customer service environment, you could propose, say you've got a client who is frustrated about something and you've been told that ahead of time, but you're not sure how that interaction is going to go. You could do some role playing with ChatGPT where it will synthesize and generate responses that might occur in that specific interaction. You could also use AI for personal things too and personal conversations. I'll share an example and from my own life. So, my mother sent me a text message, and my immediate response was frustration. I thought, oh my goodness, this must be a guilt trip. She's trying to make me feel bad about this. In reality, that wasn't what her intent was, but that was how I emotionally responded. Now, I knew because of conversations that we'd had prior that her goal was not to guilt trip me, but to make me feel supported. So I needed an objective, kind response that did not show off how frustrated I was feeling about what she said. So I went to ChatGPT. I shared the text message. And I asked it for an objective analysis, and it picked up on all the things, right? It picked up that maybe there was a little bit of passivity and maybe there was a little bit of guilt trip involved. But then it gave me three different options for how I might be able to respond to that text message in a way that was kind, in a way that was honest and forthright, while still communicating my goals as a communicator as well. And so I was able to choose one of those options, edit it to make it sound more authentic and more like me, and then share it back to her in advance. And so that interaction enabled me to moderate my own response and communicate more effectively through sharing and analyzing that communication scenario. So, you can use it in a asynchronous way, right? I took a text message response and thoughtfully used ChatGPT to come up with my response. This does take a little bit more time, so keep that in mind. Sometimes time does impact our messages and how our messages are viewed, especially if it's been a rapid fire conversation. But you can also use things like ChatGPT for preparing for presentations. If you have an idea of what you'd like to say and you want to practice those things, you could practice asking questions in advance. If you know that at the end of a work presentation, people may ask you questions about your work, you can submit. This is my presentation outline. What questions might I expect to receive after giving this presentation? And then you're able to prepare some potential responses in advance. Please don't forget you can also ask your colleagues. ChatGPT is wonderful, but you can also ask your colleagues in advance and say, hey, I'm giving a presentation on this topic. Are there any other questions you think you might like me to answer? Remember, they're your support system just as much as ChatGPT or any other AI tool is. You could also use this to practice casual social conversations, like introducing yourself in a networking environment. Um, you can consider, how might I present myself to a potential colleague versus someone that maybe I'm intimidated by. One of the things I love about this tool is it can give immediate and private feedback on things like wording and phrasing. If you're afraid that you might come off as too direct or maybe a little bit passive aggressive, if someone has told you before that that happens with you, this is a great opportunity to have chat also analyze your response. Say, hey, this is the email that I would like to send. Can you analyze it according to these parameters? Checking for clarity, checking for politeness, or whether or not it aligns with your goals. Now, all of these things that we've talked about so far are primarily text based. One challenge I'd like you to consider is potentially taking this from text into audio. Now, this is an area where I love to use this tool, but it intimidates even me. One of the things you can do in more advanced versions of the generative AI tools like ChatGPT. So it's in their Plus account. So this is a paid version. So this might not be accessible for everyone, but it might be something to consider as an accommodation at work. Is that you can turn on voice mode. Now, what this means is that instead of interacting via text and typing it into your phone, you would speak to it directly. Now, for me, I love being able to just verbalize all of the things and then have it take that information and put it into an organized outline. But it's also really valuable for practicing some of these scenarios. Now, I'm an entrepreneur and a small business owner. And as I transitioned out of higher education into the business world, I realized an area where I really wanted to grow was in sales. Sales does not come naturally to me. In my mind, my product is great. You should want to buy it. Why should I have to convince you? But that's not exactly the real world, right? So I knew there were certain sales techniques that I wanted to practice. And so one of the things that I use ChatGPT for is a voice based coach. So one of the ways we did is so I had it pretend to be in a hypothetical role play situation, um, a prospect who maybe had some uncertainties, maybe they had additional questions. And so what I practiced doing was saying, all right, I think that wraps up the presentation. What questions do you have for me? And then instead of reading chat's response, chat uses voice mode and I can hear her ask the questions. And again, instead of trying to write it all out, it prompts me to respond in a more spontaneous fashion and verbally respond to the questions. Now, this is totally an up level here, right? If we've been practicing responding to questions in text, we still get a little bit more time to process this. But if you're looking to challenge yourself again in a place that is private and safe and low stakes, this is a way for you to practice your responses to those questions. So they would ask a sales question. Maybe they had concerns about budget or they had concerns about the validity of the assessment or whatever the issue was. And then I gave my answer to the best of my ability. What chat then can do is analyze my answer and say, hey, you could have gotten right to the point a little bit more quickly, or perhaps you needed to share this case study instead. It could give me immediate feedback on the quality of my answers. Maybe I was practicing a specific sales strategy and I skipped a step. Chat can identify whether or not I used that step. And so, this ability to now do this using my own voice takes this up a notch in a way that can challenge you and help you move your skills forward. You don't have to just use this for work. You could practice vocally a conversation with someone else as well in the real world, but could also use it hypothetically with chat. There are lots of really exciting opportunities coming in this same space with virtual reality. There are companies right now, and most of these are not yet accessible or cost effective, but I really believe that these tools are coming down the pipeline where you're going to be able to practice these skills in a virtual reality session, not just using your voice, but also using video, watching for facial expressions, watching for cues and body language to be able to determine how someone is responding in that moment in a safe and low stakes environment. Like I said, these tools aren't 100% yet. We're still there's a company right now that I've talked to or is working on these tools, and it is getting better and better by the day. So I've got a lot of hope for this. But the voice side of it is available to you for right now at a pretty low cost. And so I encourage you to check that out if you are ready to move from text-based into voice-based. Now, there are lots of other opportunities here in simulation and text analysis, but I would also encourage you to consider things like specific skill based strategies. So, a new study that came out in February of 25 indicates that practicing with AI can actually help boost confidence in specifically like empathetic responses. So, one of the things that they found, and this was for autistic adolescents and adults, was statistically significant improvements in their ability to respond empathetically. And they experienced improved confidence in target areas. And many had high levels of satisfaction with this program. And so, what we are seeing from the research, and again, this just came out this year, so we're getting more and more information about how this can support even specific skills like, man, I want to grow in empathy or I want to become a better listener. So these things are continuing to develop. And what I love most about them is that they can build your confidence. You may think I'm a broken record at this point, but I'm going to come back to it one more time. Once you've practiced some of these skills with ChatGPT and I strongly encourage you to go to a friend, go to a trusted relationship, and practice some of those skills there. Ask them to hold you accountable and say, hey, would you let me know when I've done a good job with an empathetic response, or I've done a good job bringing clarity here? All right. Because we want to make sure that those skills are transferring from the technology into the real world, because it's not a replacement for those real engagements, because that's where those trust and that's where those feelings of social connection come from. And they're so important to us. Um, a caveat with all of this that I wouldn't be doing my due diligence if I didn't mention: AI can't fully replicate nonverbal cues, feedback, or the spontaneity of real conversations. The reason for this is that the technology is based off predictive modeling, and I said that earlier, which means it's based off of patterns. And if there's one thing we know about people, people are a little bit unpredictable. And so your goal in using these tools should be to practice, to become more confident in the variety and appropriateness of different responses, knowing that in the real world, things may not go exactly as you expect. And this is why transitioning that skills to give you those practices in the real world is just as important. We also want to consider things like data privacy and consent. If you are using the free version of ChatGPT, there might be a little toggle turned on that says that they are allowed to use your conversations to train their model. You want to make sure you have that turned off. This is one reason that I do recommend using a pro version or a paid version of a generative AI tool, maybe offered through your work or through a paid private account. That way, you have more control over those conversations. Because again, if you're using this tool to talk about, to have medical conversations or to talk about private conversations with friends, and especially if you're using it for work, you want to make sure that you are protecting your data and that you're giving consent in those spaces. Um, all right. We've covered a variety of different things, but I want to wrap up with just a couple of different tools and things that you might not be considering beyond the basics of ChatGPT or Gemini or Copilot or some of these. So let's think about the impact of something like a transcription or recording app. So Otter was one of the first ones to do this well, but you can find this in Zoom and so many others, um, that you can record and get a transcript of your meetings. One of the things I love about this, there's also a auto feature where you can have captions pop up automatically if that's helpful for you, or it can generate meeting summaries after the meeting. Those are so valuable because you might even be able to, after the meeting has finished, go back through that summary and add your own notes. That's one of the things I really want you to consider as we approach this from a support perspective, is if you're given that summary, your own observations are also very valuable here to capture the fuller meaning, because those transcripts might not capture the same information that you see with your own eyes, because they are based on that audio and not based on the video. So a lot of those tools in Zoom and Otter and many other different tools now for transcriptions and recordings, including on iPhone calls, is an option now. There are also text to speech apps. If you prefer to listen as part of your communication as opposed to readings, it can help reveal clarity or unintended tone. So one way you could use ChatGPT or Speechify is another of these tools, is you could have it read out loud your email. When you listen to it, does it communicate what you want it to? Are there pieces that are missing that you want to add? It might provide some surprises or insights whenever you hear something that you've written read back to you. There are also tap to talk AAC apps like Spoken, where you can give your input via typing, drawing, even selecting phrases or pictures to communicate in real time. These are particularly helpful if you find yourself in a nonverbal moment where you need additional support in communication, where you could even use pictures to communicate and share that to others to convey something very quickly. There are other social connection and communication tools like Fabric that can actually, you can enter information about your friends and it can schedule reminders to connect with others. So if you've made a new friend and you're worried about forgetting to reach back out to them in a week, you can set that as a reminder if you wanted to in apps like Fabric. And finally, there are also an amazing set of tools for improving things in the executive function space or planning apps like Timo. And these can help organize everything from study schedules to breaking tasks into steps, reducing that stress, and freeing up some of your capacity to think through the communication that you have with your peers. So, several different tools beyond the ones that we've talked about so far. Now, I want you to take a step back and remember the scenario that we reflected on at the start. These AI tools can really help you prepare on your own time for different communication scenarios that you might encounter. But most importantly, the goal is enabling you to connect more authentically and in a way that is healthy when you choose to. So, as you move through work and as you move through life, I encourage you to try some of these experiments. At the end of your handout, I've included 3 sample prompts that you can use for hypothetical role play situations with ChatGPT or the Gen AI tool of your choice. Check that out, experiment, but I always encourage you to do so within the context of your existing support systems and your community resources. These are not replacements for therapeutic resources or that close relationship that you have with a friend. Whenever you try these things out, make sure you notice and maybe keep a note of what feels helpful and what doesn't, and share feedback in the group. You're in an amazing group through this camp where you're going to learn lots of different things. And so if you find something that really works for you, share it. I know there are going to be so many others who want to test out these things as well. I look forward to hearing so many of your stories about how you're using AI technology to improve your communication, but most importantly, to connect with those around you. Thanks for watching.